Welcome back to another edition of the AUDL Take. On this episode, I thought I'd take you on a nice long journey of basically what's been going on in the AUDL for the last 8 or so years now. It's kind of a journey from beginning to end. We're going to hit all the highlights of what's gone on with major events as the league has progressed over the years and talk about some championship teams as well as some great players that have been in the league. So without further ado, let's get right into it. In 2010, the league operations for the AUDL officially began. A fellow by the name of Josh Moore became president of the AUDL and basically started sending out feelers to people, whether they were potential investors or franchise people, to start a team. And this kind of lasted until about 2012 before we actually had the inaugural season start for the AUDL. There's been rumored that there was going to be around 16 teams or so, but it ended up being 8, and there was kind of a Midwest division and an East division. So really, the big teams that you kind of see in the Midwest now and in the East, those were the teams there. Now, as far as the East went, it wasn't like New York and Montreal and all these kinds of teams. It was a lot of teams that you really don't hear about anymore. Connecticut, Rhode Island, we don't really hear about those teams much anymore. But there was an 8-team league, and it took effect in 2012, and it ended up with the Alley Cats and Philly going for the final, and Philly being the first ever champions of the AUDL title. Year 1 was very exciting for the AUDL. There was a lot of high numbers in those first few games, but we started to see kind of a dive as a lot of these franchise owners really probably have never owned a sports team before. They were experiencing some troubles. And as you can see, that if you're aware of what's been going on with the AUDL, there was a huge lawsuit at the end of that year, mostly between Connecticut, Rhode Island, and the league, and a few other upset managers and owners of teams who really just felt like the season didn't go as hopeful and as well as they planned, and it had a lot to do with the areas that these teams were in. There was a non-compete clause, basically saying that teams could have within 100 miles no other team to compete against. You know, with these teams coming in, you wanted to be able to build a fan base and not have someone right across the street who's competing against you and basically taking away some of your fans. For Connecticut and Rhode Island, these aren't necessarily big hubs, and I think the AUDL saw it as, okay, well, these people are interested, but we're going to want to eventually hit towns like New York, Boston, because of just how many people are there, and they're thinking long term. I think for Connecticut and Rhode Island, they saw that as a threat. Now, within the contract itself, that was within the non-compete clause, but I felt like the AUDL had this kind of agreement, maybe not in paper, but between these two teams, they felt that this just was unreasonable. But this started a kind of a war between these teams and the league, and you started to see fines go back and forth. You had teams not showing up. It's just kind of all over the place. A lot of people feeling like they were being fined to the highest degree just because maybe they didn't like what was going on with how this contract was dealt with, and it just kind of became bitter there towards the end. And at the end of 2012 season, starting in 2013 season, there were many lawsuits being thrown around, especially Connecticut Constitution being sued for basically not showing up to games, not agreeing to what the contracts have been said, and basically trying to bury them in legal fees. And so you kind of saw this league that looks promising start to already implode within 1 year. After all that was said and done, basically an agreement between Connecticut, Rhode Island, and a few other managers as well came to an agreement that no more lawsuits, will drop everything, but the owners did have to give up their teams and went back to the AUDL. They absorbed the teams themselves, and it basically everything just kind of was buried under the rug. But there was a lot of owners, especially with the Philadelphia team and a few others, who thought, I don't know if we can trust AUDL. I don't think they felt comfortable continuing something like this, but they wanted to see Pro Ultimate. And this was kind of the precursor of what we then saw, which was the MLU. They believed that what they saw what the AUDL was doing, they felt that they could do better and probably fix some of these problems that they saw, especially with the AUDL and how they ran their business, which we'll get into here in a little bit. Before the 2013 season started for the AUDL, a big change within the owners of the AUDL happened, and that was Josh Moore selling about 90% of his shares to Rob Lloyd and Steve Gordon, Lloyd Group being a big partner in this change of ownership. And that kind of changed the way that the fundamentals, I think, of how the AUDL was moving forward. And you also saw the beginning of the MLU. So you're starting to see now 2 pro leagues with 2 very different ways of approaching how to do it, now battling to see who will win the Pro Ultimate Wars. To better understand the Pro Ultimate Wars, we have to look at how the AUDL and the MLU functioned. Let's start with the AUDL. The AUDL basically was saying, listen here owners, you can buy a team, but all the costs are going to be on you. You have to run the team, you have to help travel, you have to pay the players. Everything that your team does, we need you to handle yourself. Now, you're gonna have to pay your dues for the league and all these kinds of things, but we are gonna be in control of what the league does. The AUDL controls, this is how we're gonna run it. There's not really an ownership by these teams to have anything real say in the AUDL. There are a few things that they're able to vote on, but it's not like they are a part of the AUDL. They are just a separate franchise that works within the AUDL. The MLU saw it a little bit differently. They wanted to do something more centralized. They wanted to have basically all the teams be put together within the MLU and they all work together to see where that navigates. Now, we kind of know how this ends up, but at the time when I was coming into the league, because I didn't show up till about 2015 working for the AUDL, but I was very aware of what was going on, I put my money on the AUDL. I think when you have something where franchises can make their own decisions, yes, it's costly for these people. They're gonna take huge risk. But if you have many different people trying to work separately and find out what works, you tend to find out what works exactly, and then other teams can start to mimic that. Whereas everybody's trying to do everything all at once together and move all forward, it tends to either be too slow and you kind of suffocate under the pressure, or you just aren't getting a chance to really experiment with new ideas. And as you see throughout the years, the AUDL became more and more creative and different types of approaches showed up, whereas the MLU, as we'll see when we talk about it, it just didn't have that jump each year. It just was trying to stay afloat. Another big thing to add about the AUDL and MLU was the AUDL was actually very adamant about advertising to people who weren't Ultimate players. And I think that was the crucial move for them, because if you're an Ultimate fan, you were aware of these leagues whether it was marketed or not. Maybe not so much, but you knew there was Pro Ultimate out there if you were an Ultimate player. But for the rest of the world, I mean, there's still a lot of people who don't even know Ultimate exists. So I think the AUDL felt that we need to market to these people outside of Ultimate. Don't try to just cater to these fans who are either gonna like it or not. We don't need to convince them. We need to convince people outside this world. The MLU kind of saw themselves as more of a, we're gonna attract all these Ultimate people who are already involved with the sport itself. And I think, as we'll see, like we're gonna keep mentioning it, I think there's a lot of mistakes that the MLU made that were genuinely good ideas, but in the long run just didn't really come to fruition. Maybe if it was just them by themselves, it would have been fine, but the AUDL had already kind of started, and I think with the individual franchisee owners brunting a lot of that pressure and putting up a lot of that money, there was more of a desire and a willingness to make sure it succeeded. Then comes 2014, the AUDL expanded to the West, and like we've always said, the West is the best. This is where the epitome of Ultimate has always been. The culture there has just been perfect for it. So that expansion showed some promise for the AUDL. There was this encouragement that, well, look at this. They've come from almost folding the first year because of lawsuits and the league almost falling apart to now they're expanding into the West with some of the best teams in the world. And a big deal is that they signed with ESPN3, which would be something that Pro Ultimate really had never done on a consistent basis. Yeah, we've seen USAU put up games and the tournaments are on ESPN2 or ESPN3 sometimes, but to have a weekly schedule to be able to market to the rest of the world was a big deal for Ultimate and for the AUDL. This deal was a 2-year with an option of a 3-year contract. And this was the beginning of starting to see Evan Lepler and all these commentators and starting to get more film in the AUDL. Before now, you were lucky to capture a game. You know, there might be some Twitter response to what's going on, or someone wrote an article, but otherwise there wasn't a lot of film to go around. And so this was actually for the first time, especially for me, I was able to tune in each week and be like, I'm watching an AUDL game. I didn't really have a lot of choices, but this was it. ESPN3, it felt like we were starting to become legitimized. Then the biggest year, at least for me, was 2015. We saw the Southern Division come into fruition, and the Atlanta Hustle being one of them. I was very lucky. I mean, if the AUDL could look in the history books when they were asking for contacts for jobs, way before there was a team in Atlanta, I was offering, hey, what can I do? Can I be a part of this? And I was very lucky when an Atlanta team came through. Another friend of mine got hired. He thought of me, and I guess the rest is history. I've been a part of the league since. So this was a big one for me, 2015, but I think once again proving that the AUDL was expanding and there was a lot of interest within the AUDL itself. The South was one of the biggest moves. I think that's a big portion of Ultimate that it has its own style, and each division has its own style, but once the South came in, and you'll see later when Dallas came in as well, the South has been a strong competitor in the AUDL, and what a big year it was. It was one of the most teams around 2015, 2016. It was the highest team numbers in the league at that time. So 2016 rolls along, and we actually see the fold in the end of the MLU. They had a good run, I think about 3 years, but with the expansion of the AUDL and with the contracts with ESPN3 and just the amount of attention and work that the AUDL was getting, from commentators coming in to the writing, the website, they were really putting a lot of money in. And like I said, the league has all this money and the franchises have to keep everything afloat. Whereas the MLU, everything got centralized and I think they just folded under their own weight. And so AUDL in 2016 wins the Pro Ultimate Wars, and ever since then really hasn't had a huge competition, really that just being the battle between them and USAU and what is real Ultimate. When 2017 rolled around, the ESPN3 deal had come to a close, and the AUDL actually had moved on to 11 sports. Now, if you haven't heard this before, well, it's not too much of a shocker. It was really just 1 year. They also came in 2018 to do a few select games, but this was just that start of getting out of ESPN3 and moving to something a little more mainstream, as if something you could tune in on just your TV, whereas ESPN3 was more of a web browser kind of approach. I think this was them looking to be able to be on television. The idea that this could legitimize the AUDL and pro sports as far as Pro Ultimate goes. So a minor step forward, but to some people, losing that ESPN brand was kind of a big deal. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of led to what we'll talk about here in a little bit. But as we move to the end of the season and starting of the 2018 season, we started to see probably the most controversial event happen within the AUDL and Ultimate as a whole, and that is the GE movement. Now, the GE movement is multifaceted. There's so many things to talk about, and I'm going to do my best to give it justice as far as what I can comfortably talk about as much as I understand and navigate through this and give you the best quick representation of what was going on. The GE movement, gender equity, was the push, and it's a kind of a spectrum, but it was the push for that equitable equality, representation amongst the sexes, and basically it kind of has how it affected the AUDL as a spectrum. It wasn't completely unified as what exactly wanted to be done, but I think the main things that we saw were women having a role within the team themselves, playing as players and within the organization. Also, it ranged from maybe pushing the league to mixed, or having women teams that the AUDL sponsored separately from the men's teams. And so kind of like how you see in the USAU, where dues are played by the players themselves and the money kind of funnels up and then they use that to build the divisions, there was that kind of approach for the AUDL to do something similar. And there really wasn't a big response from the AUDL right away. Now, for my angle of it, I think it was very quick for this to all of a sudden be jumped on them, and they just didn't have an idea of how they're going to approach it yet, and so there was some silence, and I think that rubbed the people in the GE movement the wrong way, and we started to see a boycott of the 2018 season. And this kind of affected a lot of the teams. There was a lot of great players that were beginning to play in the AUDL, especially as they are also playing in the UCU. Having those teams or those players come over, it kind of brought the AUDL's level of play higher and higher up. But now a lot of them left, and I think it's honorable what they did. I think you should always stand up for what you believe is right, and I think they felt that they needed to send a message to the AUDL that they need to have more equitable, more equality, more representation within this league. The league sort of had a few responses. They were going to continue and extend the Eurostar Tour to help promote the women's teams within the club as well as the European team that travels. And they also were talking about having a pro women's league about around 2021 or 2022. But you also saw people like me and other people around within the AUDL kind of pushing for them to maybe step into their own realm. It wasn't like there was, I don't think it was like, hey, just go do your own thing, get away from us, we're doing ours. I think the idea was, it was hard to really nail down exactly what the GE movement wanted. And I think that has developed over the years. Like I said, I'm not the one to give a perfect example on this, but there was just so many different versions of what people wanted out of it. I think we were encouraging a lot of people to be like, if you want to have perfect GE and you want to show us what it is that you want to accomplish, I think getting the support from people around you, people within the AUDL, to help build your own league so that you can put out there what exactly you want, and then the AUDL, and we can all work together to bring it. And that was kind of my biggest thing. I didn't want to be forced into having the AUDL follow these strict rules, especially when owners have put a lot of money in expecting things to be run this way, and now all of a sudden you want a mixed team, or you're forcing certain people to be on a team or in a position. I wanted this to be a natural occurring thing. But I think the movement did something really powerful, as in it put people within the league, people within Ultimate, to work together to build something, and that's what's resulted in the PUL, which I think is one of the greatest things that has come out of that whole boycott. I think it's also encouraged some players to feel that there are some movements being made across the ultimate world to help GE and get women, trans people, everybody equal representation and equal chance within the sport. And now seeing the PUL and the WUL, there's all these different things being built up, and I think this is the perfect way to move forward as we kind of build the best ultimate we can, the best ultimate community we can, and continue to move forward and give equal representation to everybody. Now, the boycott is still going on. There are still people within the GE community that feels that the AUDL still hasn't done enough, and I understand that. And that has continued to be kind of a theme here as we've moved forward. I film a lot of PU games, and you hear rumblings of, oh, this is just so much better than the AUDL. The AUDL is terrible, and I think that's just going to be some people that are going to choose that route. But the AUDL continues to move forward as strong as ever, and I think they're doing a lot of work behind the scenes as far as helping out with the PUL and help them grow as a league. I think the AUDL really wants to see them succeed. And so as we continue moving forward, let's move on now to what happened in 2018. We saw a big change moving from 11 sports to Stadium. And Stadium was just, once again, no one really heard of Stadium, but this was a lot more numbers than ESPN 3 and 11 sports. Once again, you could find it on TV. There was actually a lot of free TV apps where you could pull it up. So once again, this was another stepping stone, a little pebble step to moving to a more broader audience and getting more attention on the AUDL and Pro Ultimate as a whole. In 2019, we started to see something kind of come to fruition, something had kind of been talked about for a while, and that was an All-Star game. And I think the reason behind the All-Star game was pretty clear in my mind. If you looked at championship weekend for the AUDL, it was always their biggest event of the year. They pulled in the most fans, they probably pulled in a lot of money in donations. It was a great marketing tool to show off the league itself. And I felt like the league wanted to capitalize on that with another event during the year. So it wasn't just being built up to this one moment, but there was something in the middle to kind of boost the numbers up and get some more money flowing through the league. And that was the All-Star game. And this was an incredible start to an All-Star game. The first one ever was played up in Madison, which is a great venue for championship weekend as well. And that game alone was incredible. If you haven't watched it, I'm sure it's up on AUDL.tv, but that was an incredible way to start an All-Star weekend. But that isn't just it for 2019. We also started to see a little more celebrity attention, and that really kind of culminating, and I guess you could still call him a celebrity, but in championship weekend, we had Bill Nye there for the championship weekend, especially during the championship game. He does the coin toss, he throws the Frisbee out into the crowd, signed and everything. He even shows up at halftime and talks about his history with the ultimate sport. And I think that kind of stuff is really starting to show that the AUDL is beginning that expansion outside of the culture of ultimate itself. Yes, it's still kind of connected to it deeply, and I think they've done everything they can to still keep themselves closely rooted to AUDL, or closely rooted to ultimate, but they're starting to really get their fingers and stretch out within the sports world itself. The 2020 season was going to be the best one yet. Everyone could kind of sense it. A lot of the players, the teams, when Boston signed on, I immediately lost my mind because I've been waiting for a true, real rivalry in the AUDL, and I just felt like New York, Boston, it's already got this built-in system of just hatred for each other, and I felt like this is it. This could be the year where these two teams play, and all of a sudden you're seeing sports and everybody, Whistle Sports, anything that on media about sports, they were going to talk about these two teams clashing. And it was the perfect way to start the offseason. And as we build up, everybody could sense it. This was going to be a magical year, a great way to start a new decade in Ultimate. And unfortunately, as you all know, the pandemic that has hit our whole nation, our whole world, it just kind of came at full force and put everything to a halt. As we sit here now, just kind of waiting, will there ever be an AUDL 2020 season, or are we just gonna have to suspend and move on? From all the people I've talked to and general managers, players, there's still optimism. There's still a chance that they believe we're gonna have a season. We're not sure if it's going to be a full season, short and what it's going to be, but I think people feel confident that there will be something to be put on by the AUDL. But right now, we're just waiting and seeing as we move forward, and hopefully there is something that we can give you this year. So let's talk about the most notable teams in the AUDL historically, and we have to start with the San Jose Spiders. They are the only team to have 2 championships, and they actually did it back to back. But then we want to talk about the teams who have gone the most, and that's actually the Toronto Rush, the Madison Radicals, and the Dallas Roughnecks. Each of them have been in the championship game, not just weekend, but the game itself, 3 times, but they've all only won it once. And just an extra fun fact for you, there's only one team in the AUDL, and I shouldn't say team, I should say city, that actually has a title, but the team that is there now actually didn't win it, and that was the Philadelphia Spinners. Philly being the only city to have an AUDL championship, but the team there wasn't the one to do it. And as far as individual players, I'm really going to just talk about two, and that is within the MVP status. There are only two players who are at the top right now, tied. That is Goose Helton and Bo Kittredge. Both of them have won MVP twice. But if you have to really pick the biggest player in the AUDL right now, that is Bo Kittredge. He's the 5-time AUDL champion. He's done it, I believe, with 4 different teams, and he's actually only ever lost 1 playoff game. So it's just an incredible run that he's had early in this year. I think he's going to be someone, when you look back in the history books, he's going to have a lot of titles under his belt. There's going to be a lot of people looking to repeat what he's done and go past him. But at the rate he's going, it's going to be tough. And think about it, he started the league much older than a lot of these other people who are coming in. So to do what he's doing now at his age, it's just a truly incredible feat. Congrats to that guy, and congrats to Goose. These are probably two of the most notable, but there's still a long, long way to go in the AUDL, hopefully. So these numbers will probably be surpassed at some point as we move forward in the AUDL careers. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. We've wrapped up a quick little snapshot of the AUDL history. We have now 22 teams in the league, Boston being the latest addition, and hopefully we have something for you this year so we can have some great competition. But thanks again for tuning in. I will see you all next week.